Hey y'all, Maya Hope here, and I'm back with another video. This video is to address the first video I did about the real Egyptians, the native indigenous Egyptians being Black African. And I just wanted to go over some of the comments that were left on my video. The thumbnail for the video looks like this. And thanks to some lovely trolls, I have a lot of comments. All right, let's get into it. I'm gonna read some of these. So someone told me that me stating that since mainland Egypt is in Africa, that means the indigenous people of an African country is African, right? Like the indigenous people are African. Egypt is in mainland Africa. It is not in Asia. It is not in Europe. So why, how can you, since Egypt is not in Europe, it's not in Asia, the Middle East isn't a real area. It's a geopolitical area. It's not a continent. How can we argue that an African country somehow has native indigenous people that are non-African? If anyone can answer that question, you will win the prize. You will win the prize of the year. Like, I won't make any more of these videos. I won't argue with you. And you just can't do it. Like, I mean, how can you really sit here and say that the native people of an African country are somehow not African? All right, someone said that's a huge leap of logic. Okay, maybe I didn't explain it very well, but all of you, I'm sure most of you have heard of the out of Africa theory. Anthropologists have been studying the origins of humankind for a very long time, and even until today, it's not disputed that the first human beings came from East Africa, what is today Ethiopia and Kenya, just that general area. Both Ethiopia and Kenya are Nile Basin countries. So is Uganda, and so is Sudan, and so is Egypt. The Nile starts in Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is in Uganda. And then you have, going upward, you have Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, right? If the first people are coming from this area, and the Nile naturally flows from the southern countries up into the north and empties out in Egypt in the Mediterranean Sea, we know that the first people had to come from Africa. They didn't come from Asia. The first people to inhabit, to live in Egypt were Africans, because the first people were Africans. They were Black Africans. Black Africans originated from East Africa, in those countries I just named, in those Nile Basin countries that I just named. And then they wound up traveling to more northern countries using the Nile. Still, can you please explain to me, you know, after knowing this information, can you please explain to me how magically the native people of Egypt are not Black? The indigenous, the very first people are not Black. If the first human beings are coming from East Africa and from these Nile Basin countries. And Lake Victoria begins, it starts the Nile, it's the beginning of the Nile. The Nile starts in Lake Victoria in East Africa, and it empties out in Egypt. And the first people come from this East African region. And then people are moving from this East African region up. How are the first people not African? Black African. How are they Caucasian? Or you keep saying Caucasians, Caucasoids. People keep saying that in my comments. People keep saying that they were Asian. People keep saying that they're Middle Eastern. Middle East isn't a real thing. It's a geopolitical area, carved out, mapped up. I mean, honestly, like, this is beyond me. I'm gonna read a comment that kind of explains what I'm trying to get across, because I mean, a lot of people, I know this is going to be contested, and it should be. We should have this discussion. But Uptalk says here that they already know this but refuse the truth. The Caucasoid race didn't migrate into Egypt until around the late 3rd Intermediate period. Prior to that, the ancient Egyptians were completely black for thousands of years, going back to the Old Kingdom. Nubia and ancient Egypt were the same people, just different kingdoms. Egypt's decline as a superpower was due to its intermingling with other races. They brought in people who were not aware of their culture and customs and mysticisms. The Greeks, the Romans, and the Arabs destroyed Egypt. Now, okay, here's another thing. No, I am not sitting here saying that there aren't non-black people in Egypt. There's obviously non-black people in Egypt, but they are colonizers. Arabs colonized Egypt in the 1600s. But before that, the Greeks colonized Egypt like 3,000 years ago. Okay, I've lived in Alexandria. I've lived in Cairo. I've lived in Sinai. I see what the people look like. The people in southern Egypt, which is Upper Egypt, are black. They're just straight up black. They have dreads, they're dark skinned. I showed a video of these people, a clip of these people in my last video. It's just, I mean, yes, there are non-black people living in Egypt, but they're not native, they're not indigenous. They're not the first people, because the first people to ever exist were not non-black, they were black. So, yeah, this is just very interesting. So just please tell me, considering the out of Africa theory and considering the fact that the first human beings came from East Africa and moved from Lake Victoria up into Egypt, how could the first Egyptians not be black? Please, just answer that question.